No one came to claim her, until the widowed sheriff gave her a room and a reason to stay. Frost Hollow, Colorado Territory, winter of 1885. Snow blanketed the train platform in a thick, silent shroud. The wind howled between wooden beams, clawing through wool and skin. Flakes swirled like ghosts, burying everything in quiet white. Laura stood at the edge, 23 and alone, wrapped in a pale scarf that did little against the cold. Her faded cream dress, once meant for a wedding, was wrinkled and thin from travel. She clutched a small leather suitcase, her gloved fingers trembling from both cold and something deeper, the ache of waiting. The conductor had gone. The other passengers were gone. Only she remained, scanning the road again and again, waiting for a man she had never met, but whose words had promised her a home. She was a mail-order bride. But no one came to claim her. A distant rhythm of hooves broke the hush, slow, steady, and heavy. The townsfolk near the station stiffened. Some stepped back, others lowered their heads. The sheriff had arrived. Sheriff Silas Granger rode in through the storm like a shadow carved from stone, broad shoulders, frost-covered coat, hat pulled low. His horse exhaled steam with every step. He dismounted in silence, his boots thudded on the wood of the platform. The crowd cleared without a word. No one met his eyes. "Her," the station man muttered, nodding toward Laura. Silas turned. His gaze found her like a blade. She straightened instinctively, though her knees wobbled. "Name of the man you came to marry?" he asked, voice low. "Thomas Langston," she whispered. Silas didn't blink. There is no Thomas Langston in Frost Hollow. Her lips parted. The wind stole her breath. "You're coming with me," he said curtly. The ride to the sheriff's office was long and cold. Laura sat stiffly behind him, barely holding on, afraid to fall. The town disappeared behind them, trees like black fingers reaching through the white. Silas's jaw was tight. He said nothing, but his mind wandered to another winter 4 years ago, when Elena had waited in that same spot. She never survived the wait. Now another woman stood there, trembling, alone, forgotten. He glanced back. Her silence unnerved him more than sobs would have. Her eyes had held no outrage. Only a strange calm, like heartbreak, was already familiar. "Just this once," he told himself. "Then I go back to forgetting." Inside the sheriff's office, the stove's heat barely reached the walls. Silas poured himself coffee and gestured for her to sit. "Where are you from?" "Missouri." "Family?" "I left them behind." He did not press. He understood. He checked the town registry. "No, Langston. No one even close." "There is no such man here," he said. "You were lied to." Laura's breath hitched. Her hands gripped the chair. "Am I under arrest?" His voice was flat. "Your only crime was believing too easily." She blinked, stunned, as if the words struck harder than a cell door. He stood, opened the door. The wind howled. Snow rushed in. "You are free to go," he said. She stepped out, dazed. The cold hit like a slap. The street was nearly empty, shadows drifting through snow. She walked, slow, aimless, boots sinking into the white. Inside, Silas remained still, watching, a knot twisted in his chest. Just let her go. Then he saw her legs buckle, saw her sit, or collapse, onto a bench across the street. She shivered violently, arms wrapped around herself, hair crusted in snow. Still she did not cry. Still she did not call out. Silas cursed. His hand gripped the doorknob. A long moment passed. Then he opened the door again, crossed the street in long strides. He slipped off his coat and laid it over her shoulders. She flinched, then froze. "Come back inside," he said. Her lips were blue. "Why?" Silas looked into the swirling snow. "Because I do not have time to bury another fool who waited in the cold for someone who never came." Laura sat near the small iron stove in the sheriff's office, her knees drawn up, hands clasped tightly in her lap. The warmth barely touched her, yet she stayed still, as if movement might shatter the fragile peace that had settled between them. Silas placed a steaming cup of tea on the table beside her. He said nothing. His boots echoed once on the wooden floor before he returned to his desk and sat down. Laura did not reach for the tea. Her eyes stayed lowered, fixed on the floorboards near her feet. Every now and then, her fingers twitched, uncertain. She looked like a girl taught long ago that any comfort came with punishment. Silas picked up a quill and pretended to write, dipping it in ink, scratching the surface of a blank sheet. But his eyes, every few seconds, flicked toward her. She was quiet, obedient, but that was not what unsettled him. It was the fear in her, not the kind that came from breaking the law or meeting a harsh man. It was the kind born from long abandonment, from too many broken promises. He had seen that look before, just not on her. It was in Elena's eyes the day she died. 4 winters ago she had waited too long for help, fevered, weak, but smiling until the end. And even in those final hours, she had whispered to him, "Strength is not in not feeling, Silas. Strength is in choosing to love again, knowing it might break you." He had buried that sentence with her. And with it, all parts of himself that still hoped. Now, this girl, this Laura. Her very presence chipped at the walls he had so carefully built. He did not like it, did not want it. But if she died on his watch, something in him might go with her. "Where are your people?" he asked suddenly, not looking up. Laura blinked. Her voice, when it came, was small. "Back in Missouri." He waited. She didn't continue. "Why not go back?" She stared at the fire. "Because, back there, it is colder than this." He said nothing. Her meaning was clear. Some places were not meant to return to. Some wounds waited there, with open jaws. After a moment, Silas stood. He walked to the rack near the door, pulled down a key, and returned to the table. He placed it on the wood beside her untouched tea. "The cabin north of town has an empty room. You can stay. 3 days. Laura lifted her head slowly. Her lips parted, as if to question him, but no words came. Her eyes were wide, full of disbelief. Silas did not meet them. 3 days, he repeated. "Do not make me regret it." She nodded once, unsure whether she should thank him or remain quiet. He seemed the kind of man who would not accept either. She gathered the key with trembling fingers. When she rose to leave, still wearing the coat he had given her, Silas stayed behind his desk. He watched her walk out, the door clicking shut behind her. For a long moment, the only sound in the office was the ticking of the wall clock. Then he turned slowly in his chair, looking at the shelf behind him. A photograph rested there, dusty, slightly tilted. Elena. Her eyes in the photo were smiling, always smiling. He exhaled sharply and leaned forward, placing his elbows on the desk, covering his mouth with both hands. He stared at the space where Laura had Saturday. "Do not be angry with me," he whispered. "It is just a few nights. She will leave. I am not opening my heart. I am not breaking any promises, I swear." And yet, something inside him stirred. A crack. A shift. As if the long frozen lake in his chest had begun, ever so slightly, to thaw. The cabin was tucked at the edge of Frost Hollow, quiet and surrounded by pine trees heavy with snow. Smoke curled from the chimney, but no sound escaped the walls. No laughter, not for years. Laura stepped inside with careful feet, holding her small bag in both hands. The wooden floors creaked under her weight. The air smelled faintly of pine wood and something older, memories, maybe. She stood by the door, unsure of where to go. From the back room came a small figure, silent and still. A little girl, 6 years old, with dark hair in uneven braids and eyes too solemn for her age. She wore a wool dress too big for her frame and held a doll missing an arm. "This is Lena," Silas said from behind Laura, his voice low. "My daughter." Laura offered a gentle smile. "Hello, Lena." The girl blinked but said nothing. She didn't run, didn't smile, just turned and walked away, as quietly as she had appeared. She does not talk much, Silas added. Then he pointed toward a door near the stairs. Your room, first on the left. Laura nodded. She did not expect warmth, but the silence that hung in this house, it felt heavier than snow. Later that evening, Laura helped with dinner, though Silas said little. Lena watched her from across the table, but never spoke. Only her doll sat beside her plate, as if the quiet needed company. After the meal, Laura knelt near the fireplace and stirred the embers, adding another log to the flames. Lena sat nearby, clutching her doll. Would you like to hear a story? Laura asked softly. Lena did not answer, but her gaze lingered. So Laura began. Just a simple tale, one her mother used to tell her, about a fox who got lost in the snow and found its way home by following the stars. Her voice was gentle, melodic. The flames crackled beside her like an orchestra in rhythm. When she finished, there was no applause, no words. But Lena's mouth curled, just barely, at the corners. Not quite a smile, but close. Upstairs, Silas had heard every word. He stood outside his bedroom door, unmoving. Something in Laura's voice tugged at him, something familiar. It reminded him of how Elena used to read to Lena, back when the girl still laughed in her sleep. This is just kindness, he told himself, a temporary warmth. And yet, the cabin already felt different. The silence had softened. The fire burned brighter. The corners no longer felt so dark. A few nights later, Silas came home late from patrol. The sky was black, the stars hidden behind thick clouds. Snow had begun to fall again. He opened the door quietly, careful not to wake them. But Laura was still awake. She sat in the dim light of the fire, needle and thread in hand, mending the sleeve of a small wool sweater. Lena's sweater, the one with a hole in the elbow. Silas paused. She looked up at him. I hope you don't mind, she said quickly. It was torn, and I thought... He shook his head. No, he said, I do not mind. He did not thank her, did not smile. But something in his chest settled, as if her presence had nudged the furniture of his soul into better places. That night, Silas lay in bed and closed his eyes. For the first time in a long while, he dreamed not of storms or graves or the silence left behind. He dreamed of a fire crackling, a woman humming softly, and a little girl laughing. And in the dream, winter had finally started to melt. The morning light filtered through the frosted windows, casting pale gold across the wooden floor. Laura moved about the hearth, her sleeves rolled up, sleeves of Silas's old flannel shirt now hers to wear. She knelt near the fireplace, coaxing the flames to rise, her fingers red from the cold that still clung to the stones. Silas stood a few feet away, returning from chopping firewood, his gloves stiff with ice. He was about to speak, to ask if the kettle had been set, but just then Laura shifted to grab another log and slipped. Her boot caught on the corner of the rug, and her body pitched sideways. Silas moved before thinking. In 2 strides he was there, his hands catching her just above the waist. Their bodies nearly touched. Laura gasped softly, and her hand flew up to steady herself, landing against his chest. Time froze. Their eyes met, hers wide with surprise, his dark and unreadable. His hand lingered at her side, warm even through the fabric. Her breath quickened. So did his. Neither spoke. They stood like that for what felt like hours, though it was only seconds. Then Silas pulled away first, gently, slowly. He stepped back as if burned, jaw clenched. Be careful, he said gruffly, his voice lower than usual. Laura nodded, eyes lowered, cheeks flushed. She sat back on her heels, smoothing her skirt, though it needed no smoothing. Silas turned toward the door without another word, but his pulse thundered in his ears. She is too young, he thought, too soft. She deserves a kind man, not one with blood on his hands and ghosts in his house. And yet, he had memorized the rhythm of her steps, noticed when she coughed in her sleep and brought an extra blanket, watched her hands when she braided Lena's hair, and how the child leaned in with a trust she rarely gave anyone. He had not meant to feel any of it. That evening, as the snow fell again, Lena tugged gently at Laura's skirt and asked, "Can I sit next to you?" Laura smiled and opened her arms. The girl curled beside her like a kitten, silent but content. When Silas returned from patrol, he found them both asleep in the rocking chair near the fire. Laura's head tilted back, Lena nestled on her shoulder. He stood there in the doorway for a long time, unable to move. Something fragile stirred in his chest, something he thought had died long ago. The next morning, Lena ran to Laura with a drawing, a messy but earnest picture of 3 stick figures holding hands. She pointed, "That's me, that's you, and that's Daddy." Silas almost dropped his coffee. From that day on, Lena started calling Laura Miss Laura, then simply Laura, and finally Lala. It stuck. Silas said nothing when he heard it. But that night, Laura left something small on Lena's pillow, a neatly embroidered handkerchief, pale blue, with the child's name stitched in soft pink thread. Lena slept holding it to her chest. Silas saw it the next morning, and for a long time he stood by the door, watching his daughter sleep, the embroidered cloth clutched in her small hand. He turned away before Laura could see the expression on his face. That evening, as he trimmed the lantern outside, he caught a glimpse of her through the kitchen window. Laura, hair tied up loosely, singing under her breath as she stirred soup. Her voice was low, almost inaudible, but it carried through the cold. He gripped the edge of the porch railing, heart tightening. "You are not allowed to want this," he told himself. "Not again. Not now." Still, when he stepped back inside, her song had stopped, but her smile when she saw him was still there, and it undid him more than any bullet ever could. The frost still clung to the rooftops of Frost Hollow, though the sun had begun its slow return. Life in town resumed its quiet rhythm, storefronts opened, wagons rolled in, and gossip, as always, traveled faster than any stagecoach. Laura had ventured out early that morning with Lena to the general store. The child had outgrown her shoes, and Laura wanted to find fabric to mend the lining. She walked with her head low, trying to remain invisible despite the borrowed coat on her shoulders and the warmth that clung to her cheeks whenever someone glanced her way. At the corner of Main and Pine stood the fabric shop, and behind its counter, as usual, was Mrs. Althea Whitcomb, a woman of tight corsets and tighter smiles. As Laura entered, a bell above the door chimed. Conversations hushed, all eyes turned. Laura gave a polite nod and tried to focus on the spools of thread in front of her. Lena clutched her hand, sensing the change in the air. Then came the voice, sharp, rehearsed. "Well, if it is not the mail-order bride who never got claimed." Laura stiffened, her fingers tightened around Lena's. "I do wonder," Althea continued, addressing no one in particular, though everyone was listening. "What sort of girl writes letters to men she has never met, arrives in white lace, and finds herself living under a widowed sheriff's roof? What kind of woman does that, I wonder?" Someone laughed, just once, enough to echo. "She must be quite the actress," Althea said, "luring a grieving man and confusing the poor child into calling her family." Laura turned, her face pale. "Please, stop." But Althea only lifted her chin. "You do not belong here. You are a shame, Miss Whatever Your Name Island. Go back where you came from." Laura's mouth opened, but no sound came. Lena looked up at her, frightened, and in one panicked motion, Laura turned and fled, her hand wrapped around the child's. Snow kicked up behind her boots as she ran through the street, tears stinging her eyes, her breath uneven. She did not stop until they were behind the sheriff's office, away from sight. Lena began to cry. Inside the shop, the door burst open with a violent creak. Silas Granger stood on the threshold. He had heard. His presence was immediate, silent, and terrifying. The murmurs died. No one spoke. Althea froze mid-folding a bolt of fabric. "Sheriff," she greeted, her voice almost sweet. "I was just—" He stepped forward. "You said enough," he cut her off. His eyes swept the room. The townsfolk stared down at their shoes. No one dared meet his gaze. I do not care what letters she wrote, he said, voice like sleet against glass. I do not care what story brought her here. She is under my roof, under my name, in my home. Althea opened her mouth, but he raised a hand. If anyone speaks her name with anything less than respect, he continued, they speak against me. A pause. And I do not take kindly to insults in my town, especially ones hurled by cowards hiding behind ribbon counters. Althea's face reddened. Silas turned once more to the onlookers. Laura stays. You do not have to like it, but you will hold your tongues. And with that, he walked out. Word spread fast. That afternoon, when Laura sat silently in the kitchen, Silas returned. He placed a small paper bag in front of her. Inside was blue thread and a pair of children's shoes. I thought you might still want them, he said simply. Laura stared at the items, then looked up at him, her eyes filled with something deeper than gratitude, something close to awe. You defended me. I enforced what is right, he replied. You could have let them say it. You did not owe me anything. No, he said, his voice quiet now. But I owed myself that. She blinked. Why? Silas exhaled slowly, then turned his gaze toward the window. Because I watched someone I love be ignored by this town. I will not let them do it to you. He left the room, leaving her breathless. And that night, as the snow melted in the gutters, a new kind of warmth settled over the house. Not just from the fire, but from the knowledge that someone had stood for her, not as a favor, but as a choice. The snow had thinned. The days grew longer, though the nights still bit through the seams of the windows. Spring had not yet arrived, but there were hints, a stubborn bird's song, softer winds, sunlight that lingered just a moment longer on the floorboards. Laura received the letter on a Tuesday. It came tucked among Silas's mail, a neat envelope with her name in careful ink. Her hands trembled as she opened it near the window, the light catching the edges of the page. It was from her cousin Benjamin in Illinois, someone she had written months ago, before even dreaming of Frost Hollow. He had space, he said, a spare room and a stable income. You deserve better than wandering after broken promises. The letter ended. Come home. We will make you safe again. Laura folded the paper slowly. Her throat tightened. The fire crackled behind her, but her heart had already gone cold. That night, after Silas and Lena had gone to bed, she packed quietly. Just a few things, her embroidery, her shawl, the handkerchief with Lena's name she could not bear to leave behind. She had almost made it to the front door when his voice stopped her. Where are you going? Laura turned. Silas stood at the foot of the stairs, half in shadow, his sleeves rolled to his forearms, his jaw tense. She swallowed hard. I got a letter from my cousin. He offered me a place to stay. I thought, maybe I should go. He stepped closer, his boots quiet on the wooden floor. Why? He asked, voice low. Because it is what you want, or because you think you should. She hesitated. I do not belong here. That is not what I asked. Tears welled in her eyes. She tried to speak, but the words tangled in her throat. Finally, they spilled out. I am afraid, she whispered. If I stay, I will want more. I already do, and I do not know how to carry that without breaking. Silas stood still, watching her. Laura looked away. This was never my home. I was just someone you helped, and I cannot, should not, ask for more. He moved then, slowly, to the cabinet by the fireplace. He opened it and pulled out a small wooden box. He carried it to her, then placed it gently in her hands. She looked at him, confused. Open it, he said. Inside was a folded handkerchief, old, but carefully kept. The fabric was embroidered with a single name in elegant thread, Elena. My wife's, he said. She made it the winter before she passed. She kept her kindness in everything she touched, and you reminded me of that. Laura's fingers trembled as she held the cloth. I loved a strong woman once, Silas continued. And now I find myself standing here, not because you need me, but because I need to say something I never did before." She lifted her gaze to meet his. "I see you, Laura, not as someone to protect, not as someone passing through, but as a woman who stitched herself into our lives, stitch by stitch. And this time, I will not stay silent." She opened her mouth, but he stepped closer, voice softer now. "You deserve to be wanted because you are worthy, not because you are convenient or in need." Tears spilled freely now. "I do not know what comes next," he said, "but I want you to stay, because you choose it." Laura clutched the handkerchief to her chest, and for the first time since stepping off that train, she let herself hope that maybe, just maybe, she was not a mistake. That night, she unpacked quietly, not because she had to, but because she chose to. And outside, the snow began to melt. The spring thaw came late that year, reluctant and slow, like a child afraid to step forward. The ground was soft beneath the snow now, and the streams ran faster. Life in Frost Hollow began to stir again, but inside the sheriff's cabin, time came to a standstill. It started with a cough. Just a faint sound from Lena's room in the middle of the night. Laura had heard it and risen quietly, her instincts alert. She pressed her hand to the child's forehead. Burning. The fever had come like a thief, sudden, sharp, and merciless. Silas was already halfway through putting on his coat when Laura stopped him. "No," she said firmly. "There is nothing out there the doctor can do that I cannot, not in this storm, not at this hour." His eyes were wild. The memory of losing Elena, of watching her slip away from him inch by inch, clawed its way into his chest. "She is just a child," he said. "She is." "She is strong," Laura interrupted, "but she needs us calm." He stared at her for a moment, chest heaving, then slowly removed his coat. For 2 days and 2 nights, Laura never left Lena's side. She cooled the fever with damp cloths. She whispered lullabies. She spooned warm broth into the child's mouth, even when her lips barely moved. Silas watched from the doorway, helpless, haunted. He brought wood to keep the fire alive, fetched blankets, did anything Laura asked without question, but the truth sat heavy in him. He did not know how to care for what he loved. He had lost too much, buried too many memories beneath the snow, and he feared this would be another. On the second night, Laura sat in the rocking chair by the bedside, Lena's tiny hand curled in hers. Her eyes were rimmed red, her shoulders hunched in exhaustion. "Please," she whispered into the darkness. "Please stay. I am not ready to let you go." The dawn came quietly, and with it, Lena stirred. Her lashes fluttered, her cheeks, once pale, now flushed with color, her voice, dry as parchment, barely audible. "Mama." Laura froze. The word hung in the air like the first green bud breaking through frost. Tears slipped silently down her cheeks. Silas stood in the hallway, watching. Something inside him broke and bloomed. Later that morning, when Laura finally stepped outside to breathe, she found Silas sitting on the porch. He looked older in the morning light, softer somehow, the burden of fear still etched in the corners of his eyes. She sat beside him. For a while, neither spoke. Then he turned, took her hand gently in his. "I lost a family once," he said. "I thought that was it, that the rest of my life would be just duty and dust." She looked at him, waiting. "But you," he said slowly, "you walked in, carrying nothing, not even hope. And somehow, you brought it back. You made this house warm again. You made her laugh." His voice cracked. "You gave us a reason to need again, to trust again." Laura's throat tightened. Silas squeezed her hand, looked her square in the eyes. "I do not care what name the world gives us. I do not care about town gossip or what comes tomorrow. This," he nodded toward the window where Lena lay resting, "this is family. Not because of blood, because we chose it." Laura leaned her head against his shoulder, and for the first time, neither of them pulled away. The frost had finally loosened its grip. In Frost Hollow, spring did not arrive in bursts of color, but in soft signs, buds blooming cautiously, the sound of boots no longer crunching on snow, and laughter echoing again through the town square. The spring festival was an old tradition: bonfires, braided ribbons, fresh pies, and folk music that drifted like perfume through the air. Silas Granger stood near the church steps, clean-shaven, in a dark coat not worn since his wedding day long ago. His shoulders, once rigid as stone, now carried a quiet ease. His hand rested firmly around Laura's. She stood beside him in a simple blue dress with embroidery along the hem, stitched carefully by Lena's tiny hands. Her hair was half up, braided with wildflowers. She looked like spring itself had chosen to take form in her. People paused as they passed, not out of fear, as they used to when facing Sheriff Granger, but out of respect, of witnessing something sacred they could not name. When the music paused and silence blanketed the square, Silas stepped forward. His voice carried, not loud, but clear. "She did not come from this place," he began, his eyes on Laura. "She came from a letter, a promise broken, from miles of cold and fear." He looked out at the people of Frost Hollow. "But she brought something back to this town, to my home, something I thought we had buried for good: hope." There were murmurs in the crowd, nods from familiar faces. Even old Mrs. Hargrove, the seamstress who once judged Laura harshly, wiped her eyes discreetly with a handkerchief. Silas turned back to Laura and reached into his coat pocket. He pulled out a small, simple box. Inside was a ring. Gold, modest. A new band had been added, carefully melted and reforged, part from Elena's, part from the one Laura had worn when she first arrived. Laura gasped softly, her hand flying to her chest. "It is not a proposal in front of a preacher," he said quietly, "and it is not the way I plan to love again, but it is mine, and it is true." He slid the ring onto her finger, his hand steady. "If you will stay, not as someone I protect, but as someone I live for, then we are already a family." Tears sparkled in Laura's eyes. She could not speak, so she simply nodded. And when Lena ran up and wrapped both arms around their legs, everyone in town knew no words were needed. Later that evening, as the sun dipped low and golden over the horizon, Silas sat on the porch, with Laura curled beside him and Lena asleep inside. The last light kissed the hills. He reached into his breast pocket and pulled out a folded letter. In his low, gravelly voice, he began to read, not to Laura, but to someone else. "Elena, my love, I once believed my heart had frozen, that it had broken into pieces too small to gather. You knew that storm was coming before I did. You knew what it would cost us. And still, you waited." He paused, glancing at Laura beside him, her eyes closed in peace. But one day, during the deepest snow, a girl appeared. She did not ask for anything, not pity, not rescue, just a place to sit, a cup of tea, a soul that did not turn away. He swallowed hard. "She taught me what you always knew, that love is not thunder or fire. It is a slow burning warmth, one ember, then another, enough to make it through the cold." He folded the letter carefully, tucked it back into his coat. And when Laura shifted, her head resting on his shoulder, he smiled, truly, for the first time. And Frost Hollow bloomed. If this story touched your heart, if you felt the cold of Frost Hollow melt just a little at the warmth of Laura's courage and Silas's quiet love, then don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to Wild West Love Stories. Here, we believe love isn't always loud. Sometimes, it arrives in snowstorms, in silent kindness, and in the slow return of spring. More tales of courage, healing, and forbidden love on the untamed frontier are waiting for you. So saddle up, join the journey, and remember, out here, love always finds a way. Subscribe now and never miss the next story that'll steal your breath and maybe, just maybe, mend your heart.